Now it's even more difficult to get. So what it's going to mean is having pork is even going to be more of a status symbol, because now you can brag like, well, even with swine flu and the culling of all of our pigs and the 7x increase in the price of pork, we can still have it at our dinner table. Look how rich and well connected we are, because we could get it and other people can't, which is only going to drive demand more as everybody bids up for face value. And I'm really curious when a piece of pork is going to cost the same amount as a diamond. Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum, and the media overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine. But then the paperwork that's supposedly running back and forth with all the documents, bill of lading, all the shipping that you need between countries, you have to send, 3 copies, couple FedEx or DHL, whatever service you're using, physical paper copies. That's why using blockchain is such a bonus here, because you can load that into the blockchain unaltered and somebody else can get it on the other end. But that would cease too, because all commerce is going to cease. You think they're going to leave DHL offices open during that tumultuous time? Do you really think they're going to let all the shipping companies continue to operate as normal during that time? And how long would it take to quell the protests before everything got back to normal again? Weeks or months, plural, for sure. It's not going to be a one-day thing and, okay, everybody good. The disruption escalates. So I was reading some articles here that Singapore is already planning to take on transshipping, and then Kaohsiung Port in Taiwan, in southern Taiwan, is also planning to take on more cargo in the event that Hong Kong, the disruption in the banking and the supply chain alone of what would happen in Hong Kong would absolutely lock up part of this planet. Unbeknownst to most people how integrated everything is at the moment, but their ramp up is 3 weeks at the minimum. So think about the onward supply chain from that point. How many things would disappear out of our stores with just-in-time delivery? Generally, there's 3 days of food in a city. Other things that take a little longer to get there, maybe a hammer or a shovel or something, quickly disappear. Now, a lot of companies today don't have big warehouses like they used to, or they'd have some super gigantic warehousing facility in, say, California. But do you think that even if they do have a warehouse in California, that shovel would make it all the way out somewhere in Alabama? Piedmont, Alabama, local hardware store, Home Depot. You think they're going to run out of stuff? But again, when you look at a store shelf, half the stuff's from China, 50% of the stuff is either American made or Canadian made or European imported or wherever it comes from, outside Mexico, anywhere, which would have its own internal mechanisms of creating supply shortages. But what's in those containers destined inland that continue to keep this machine chugging along? This is just one single flashpoint on the planet that's happening at the moment. Because Kashmir, they don't export a lot. I've been researching the areas on the planet that seem to be points that also underlying current on there is their new grow zones that could be turned into massive grow zones as areas in countries go offline, and we're starting to see this everywhere across the planet at the moment. So when you look around this planet and all these hot points going on, take a step beyond the politics into the possibility to turn these areas into new food growing zones with increasing rainfall patterns. And look beneath your feet into the soil, literally, that can be grown plants or crops to feed people. And see if it takes a different light as to how our positioning is across the planet, annexing, That's the largest breadbasket in Europe, period. Tunisia, Algeria, largest grain production ever this year as well. Isn't that quirky? How new grain zones are coming on where the Roman grain growing areas had gone dry for 2,000 years. Now the rain's back, growing bumper record crops, and then suddenly, oh, that person's got to go after 30 years. But we'll take over the farming. Far beyond oil here. The plays that you're seeing, they can continue to tell you it's about oil for some point in the future here. But eventually you're going to wake up and go, oh, it's all about growing food now. Energy will be secondary to food. Also, if any of these disruptions happen, everything's going to go up in price. So we're taking a look here at some of the articles I've been surfing through the week in terms of slowdown in consumption. And I look at some of these. Diamond crisis. So take a look at where the slowdown is. The slowdown in the bottom 50% of a country, they don't spend much anyway, so that really doesn't matter, doesn't count. Because people that don't have much money, that if they slow down their spending, well, they didn't have much money to begin with, so slowing it down really doesn't indicate much other than maybe they're saving for Christmas, holidays coming up. But this is the opposite, because people with money buy large gemstones. People with money buy large carat stones for engagements and weddings. Diamond crisis, De Beers sales plunge 44% as demand plummets globally. They're usually selling about $500 million worth of diamond product per month. But this last 3 months aggregated only came out to $280 million per month. So what's going on? And they were talking about specifically, 2 carat and above diamond just crashed. And they have a whole table here of different carat sizes that have crashed. And the secondary market's showing no demand for goods as well. And what's shocking in this is these secondary sales points here. They're talking about the commercial grades of the diamonds, 30 point, and they have all these other different types of diamonds listed out here. And they're saying that the market shows no demand, and now they're even being sold at a loss or at break-even profit. So what they're talking, the clients are waiting for polished demand to pick back up and are trying to buy as little as possible. Well, for me, that screams big money pulling back on spending. Now, why would that be? Where's the smart money? If they have a lot of money, why are they not spending their money? It's about ostentatious show with the big money crowd. So why would they pull back on spending on jewelry so quickly? Almost a 50% reduction. See, now these are the kind of things where you go, what else might be slowing down out there? Let me see if I can weave another one in here. Still on Zero Hedge. They have some of the best info on the net if you're looking for true information about the state of our economy. Car manufacturers halt production in India amid disastrous slowdown. Disastrous slowdown. India. I thought that was the major economy that's just running away, like gonna build the global economy. Just hold on, India is running away. It's the new superpower economically. Wow, India, China, just running, run, marathon. Well, if your car manufacturing is a disastrous slowdown, everything else behind it slows down too. And then we see what happened with China, 46%. That's almost 50% food inflation in the first 6 months of the year. And then more headlines. Everywhere you look, it's about China pork prices. China reels as pork levels at a record high. Now, you're coming up with the holidays here, and then, you get the Chinese holiday season rolling up here through the following Chinese New Year. We got, the golden holiday, the golden week. Everything's centered around food and pork. Now, pork's a very significant, cultural, important food to be at the dinner table in China. No pork, you're poor. You can't afford meat, you pauper. In China, you're losing face if you don't have pork. Now it's even more difficult to get. So what it's going to mean is having pork is even going to be more of a status symbol. Because now you can brag like, well, even with the swine flu and the culling of all of our pigs and the 7x increase in the price of pork, we can still have it at our dinner table. Look how rich and well-connected we are. Because we could get it and other people can't. Which is only going to drive demand more as everybody bids up for face value. And I'm really curious, like when a piece of pork is going to cost the same amount as a diamond, because it looks like it's going to reach parity. I wonder if that could be a new parity point. Diamond pork price parity, in the Chinese market, quarter carat diamonds or something. There has to be a diamond price and category that would be equal to the pork price per piece, not per kilogram, but per piece. 18% increase in these things right here. Dumplings and soya bean products. Doujiang, which is the soya milk that's heated that a lot of people drink in the morning. And then something called mapo tofu, which is it's kind of a soft tofu dish with spicy, and they mix a couple vegetables in there. It's really hot. If you like spicy food, mapo tofu is what you want to get, but it's super oily as well. But 18% in 2 weeks, I don't know how many of us can afford that kind of food price rise. For a family of 4, and then it's up more than 50% in the last 6 months. Well, some areas here are putting it 48% on overall just total food, and then others are saying above 50%, and everything that you see for wholesale pork pricings, 3, 4, 5, up to 7x, depending on what cut you're getting out of the pig. So China is experiencing what the rest of the world will experience early, as an indicator of where our global society is going to go with food pricing and how that in turn is going to crush the economy. Look no further than what is happening in China, and then just extrapolate that out into the greater global economy. So if your food price rises 50% in 6 months, now we don't know if it's going to stabilize. I have no idea. I'm just saying so far up to this point, it's risen 50% in the first 6 months. Let's say a family's spending $400 on food, they're going to have to spend $600 on food. So that $200 is going to get pulled out of the other rest of the economy somewhere, whether it be a subscription service to something, whether it be travel, whether it be new clothes, new electronics, movies, restaurants. That money's going to get pulled out. Now, what if it doubles in price? And then instead of spending $400 a month, and I'm being very conservative with $400. I mean, a family of 4 for $400, I don't even know if you could do that. But I'm just going to use 400 because I see that number tossed around a lot for couples, individuals, etc. Monthly for food, and it's quite a statistically used number, 400, 600. You see this a lot of places, 800 sometimes. So we'll stay on 400 on the low ball. Now, what if it doubles? So then your food cost is 800 and it doubled. Now what? That's a significant portion of disposable income coming out of somebody's wages. Because you got to think about how much tax you're already paying on your wages, what your real take-home pay is. I always, laugh at people when I'm talking and they go, yeah, well, I'm making $102,000. And I said, okay, great. Well, how much are you paying in tax? And they're like, 40%. Okay, so really, you're only making 60. And then I said, well, how much is your sales tax in your state? And they're like 10%. And I said, all right, well, that's minus $6,000 there. So you got like 54. You got about half of what you really say you make. And then divide that by 12 months. And what do you get? $4,000 a month? How much is your rent? How much is your car insurance? And you start breaking it down. Even if you're making $100,000 a year and then you have all those other expenses, if your food price doubles from, say, 400 to 800, that's still going to cut in. That's going to, be 20% of your disposable, whatever's left at the end of the month there, versus 10%. Because that's a big jump from 10% for your food cost to 20% of your food cost for all of the money you have left. You're definitely going to shift something. You're going to move it, morph it, shift it. So as the food prices continue to increase in China, they have been looking here. Here's the whole fakeness of it all. So they say, we're not going to buy American ag products. But then, they're out on the rest of the world going, hey, we need more soya product, but we can't find enough. So now the prices of soya inside China are rising. So I wonder how long it's going to be before the citizens are like, all right, food's getting too expensive. Start dealing with America again. They got more food to sell us. Bring down the price. Because the Russian sellers don't have enough stock to supply China. They've already sold them everything they have for this year's availability. It's gone. And what month are we in? Argentina. I did that whole 20-minute part a couple of weeks ago about Chinese investment to dredge out the rivers and upgrade the port facilities to be able to buy all the cargo, soybean cargo and grain cargo, ag cargo, from Argentina and Brazil. Okay, they swooped up all that production and they're still in a deficit. Now what? I mean, what they swooped out of Argentina and Brazil and Russia, how long is that going to last before they're back on the world market Like this whole smoke and mirrors thing of, oh, we're going to stop buying. That's ridiculous. They import more than any other country food on the planet, hands down. They don't grow enough. Plus, they lost so much this year. It's ridiculous. What publicly they're saying 35% of the corn. So again, when we come over to corn and beans, seeing how they're being grown in the same areas, periphery-wise, there's been more flooding in the bean areas, and the rice has been washed away too. They have enormous rice losses due to too much flooding. Third typhoon to roll over and damage the crop growing areas this year alone. It's like some of these typhoons are being steered right over the crop grow zones in China. It's very strange how the storms are taking like a dog leg. Turn left, turn right. Like, how does something go and then take a 90-degree turn in nature? Just not normal. Usually things curve. Fibonacci sequences, spirals, golden means. Usually things just don't go right instantly, or left, or straighten out. Using energy or geoengineering to direct that storm so perfectly. You know, if I was able to manipulate the weather and I wanted to send a message to the world on how good I'm dialed in the technology, this is it right here. And this is the exact same thing that's happened over in China like 3 times in a row, where these storms they'll come in and they'll spin up the coast and they'll dump an enormous amount of rain in the crop grow zones, hence the losses in China.
It's amazing the amount of detail you've actually gone into, and I think that's what gives what you're saying a lot more credibility than people just saying, well, the sun's doing this or climate change is doing this. You've clearly put a lot of research into what it is that you're presenting.
Yeah, the people who taught me what I'm doing told me from the beginning, you have to be 100% science-backed, and when they come to question, you throw them the charts, you throw them the peer-reviewed links, and there's really nothing they can say at that point because they always want to talk about the science. Well, here's the peer-reviewed science. And now what? What's next? Yeah, all the de-ice trucks have been put away for the summer. So when there was record snow, they're like, you need to wait. So there were 11 airplanes waiting out there,
wow.
like 3 trucks.
Okay,
de-ice.
So I guess that, like you said there, there's a lot of things to talk about. So let's talk about, say, what you do as a businessman. What got you in on this field? Because I guess you cover a wide variety of topics and subjects through your research and your podcast that you put out. But I guess you come at it from a bit of an entrepreneurial kind of businessman standpoint, which gives you a unique perspective. Because when I was listening to you, the one thing I found very plausible what you have to say is that you looked at it like, well, I'm monitoring the climate, I'm monitoring my temperature because this is my business. You know, I'm growing coffee, I'm growing my business this way. This is important. I have to look at agriculture. And then you appear to blossom from there. I mean, so how did you get into all that?
You know, just like whatever you follow in life seems to bloom out, wherever that, I guess, motivation and thought and energy goes into expands. And I've always tried to keep that travel and incorporate it into my life. I don't want to give that up. If it's my choice to live how I want to incorporate travel as well as being paid and get to see exotic places, new destinations, and then why not? You know, it's my choice. And that's the way I went with it.
So tell me about coffee. What got you the actual taste of coffee? Were you growing a particularly unique strand of coffee? Because I guess, you know, from a consumer point of view, you go into the shop, you see a bay of coffee, you see all the different varieties from different countries. They tend to be only scored on a kind of grade scale of like 1 to 6, light to strong. I mean, I guess when you are, you know, hands down on the ground, you know the difference between the very beans themselves. I mean, coffee is pretty important, obviously, world export. And where does your taste sit on the scale? What do you like?
Incredibly strong. I mean, I don't like espresso, double espresso with a drop of milk in it. And you know that when you're trying to grade the coffee beans in the Arabica side, don't ever really touch too much the Robusta stuff. That's more Vietnam. What we did, it was the Arabica side, and we were usually grading between like 85 and 93 somewhere. And then Myanmar was around between, let's say, 87 and 92, kind of right in that range. And yeah, just the way they dry them, the way they process them, does it still have the full skin on it when they let it dry out in the on the drying, you know, pans out there? They're concrete slabs that they get it out to, or do they take the skins off and wash it once, or they wash it twice? There's all kind of different things, naturals, and if I could get a single origin. So like one cup of coffee comes from one country and one farm. We weren't so much into that specialty grade. It was more about what you're talking about, something that a coffee roaster would buy 10, 20 tons of, and then what they would do is blend it in with, 30% from Central America, 30% from Brazil, 40% from Myanmar, whatever, to make their own taste profile that might be like your 4 or 5 on their scale.
Yeah.
But they're not using 100% from one single destination. Usually, most times coffee shops, when they're coming to that scale, they're blending their own to try to get a certain flavor that you talked about. Pretty much hits the cut, just the center of the road for everybody. Because if you're starting to get into these $12, $15 cups of specialty coffee with a sliver of lemon flavor, a hint of no chocolate over here, that's such a rare crowd. Most people want to get in, get their morning go-go juice, and then shoot out. If you can find somebody in that maybe top 10% that really appreciates coffee, that can actually get down to it, talk about the countries, talk about the flavor profiles, and then you have a conversation. But most people are just happy to get something and then go. A 5 if they're 6 if they have a morning meeting, a 4 if they want to start their day. I don't know about you. You got coffee there. What kind are you drinking?
I've actually got a blend, I have to say. Typically, I actually tend to go for beans through my cafetiere or through my coffee machine. But I was in a bit of a bind a couple of days ago. I ran out of coffee and I was like, I'll get this Kenko mix off the side. It's pretty strong. I quite like it. I tend to go for the old two teaspoons of coffee in there. Obviously add water. But so what do you you tend to use a coffee machine? How do you percolate yours? Do you have like a special?
Always go with since we have our own beans and still know people who have full beans. I always go to my local coffee shop and I take the green beans to them, and I have it roasted to the flavor profile that I like. I like mine much stronger with a little more caffeine in it. So I have them roasted exactly the way I like, and then it's full roasted beans. Then I come up with the grinder, and then we have the press and all these things that. So I like coffee. I like it. Something where I can make a much larger batch than just like a little cup like this, because I'll go through that in the first few minutes in the morning just to get my brain functioning, and then as I go through the day. What I do like is the way the coffee tastes after it gets a little bit older through the afternoon.
Yeah.
When you add the milk into it, it just takes on a different taste that I really like. So if you brew it, let's say 9 in the morning, by the time it comes around 2 p.m., if it's been espresso and properly brewed, not something out of a big pot, but that it's gone through a press. If you leave it in the fridge, I don't know, the flavor changes real nice where you can just put some milk in that, shake it up. I put a little honey in, milk, and then shake it until it gets frothy and delicious. And so if you brew it out in the morning, you can keep it for the whole day and then just kind of sip that as you go along through the day.
Yeah, this is the kind of conversation I kind of prefer, really, just the kind of open, free-form conversation, because I think there's something intrinsically important in terms of my learning. I like to talk through things. I like to understand. I like to understand different points of view, and really just having a free-form conversation as opposed to an interview. I think interviews tend to be a bit like, this is my set of questions, and there we go. And as soon as that's done, see you later. And I think there is something okay to that when you work in broadcasting, but I think if you with a free-form conversation, there's the option to to go off track. There's the option to ask questions back to me in the same way. And I think there's something a bit more. If you're a listener to that, there's that draws you in a different way, and I think we're moving towards a new form of podcasting in general. I think that's bringing out that ability to have in-depth conversations, particularly one-to-one with people. That I think has been lacking with people lately. People are so used to sending text messages to each other, 4 or 5 messages that are already abbreviated words, and they've lost that ability to communicate. So for me, there's something really powerful about having a conversation.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head there, too, coming back for the second time, because don't give up, don't quit. That's the whole thing, is you find it, you revise it, you revamp it, and you come back and keep going at it, because it's another way to communicate and deliver a message out there, because right now the communication, you're right, between everybody is just getting more cut and more fragmented. And in the States, it's even more fragmented, because they're cutting everybody by whatever political beliefs it is, and there's 1,000 different kind of belief systems that they're wedging everybody apart in right now. And then you get into the socio-economic there, where, you're rich, you're bad, you got money, you're bad, you live in the wrong part of town, you live in the good part of town. They're wedging everybody on money. What kind of books you want to read? They're going to wedge you on that, too. You're reading this kind of book. You're way out there. You shouldn't be reading, that's too much this. We should ban these books, actually. People shouldn't even be allowed to hear these thoughts. And then if you
that's
believe in
happening
free
everywhere.
speech, you're wedged. And if you want to, censor voices, you're wedged. But, being in the communication thing, I don't care what you say. Everybody's got a voice. And if you don't agree with it, walk away.
Absolutely.
Who cares what you think? If you don't agree with the message, don't try to silence the voice. Just move on until you find a message that you agree with. But you spend all the time that the Americans are doing now to try to silence voices is downright scary.
Yes,
This is what we saw all throughout history, right before it gets to the edge of things you don't want to really be getting into.
I guess it's that move towards fascist control. Even that word, it has connotations with itself. But that ability to take away anybody else feeling in danger of what that information could be to them. So, but then technically you've got then I hate to use the word, a police force or a control method. So that could be a bunch of individuals who just don't like a certain message, and they're going to go, well, we need to protect people, so we're going to stop people from ever hearing this message at all. And I think in many ways, you can. So what is it they're against? I mean, is it because they just don't want dissenting ideas, or they just don't want conversation to be out there because they are working on this kind of base point of view that is, they are evil, they are bad, we must stop that voice even getting out?
Yeah, my whole premise is that as we go into this grand solar minimum, the thing I talk about the most, they're going to want the line of communications cut between us, because when it really comes down to it, there are going to be food shortages on the planet. There's going to be extreme food price rises. There'll be riots because of this. There is going to be social chaos. And that's why I talk about and do my channels, so we all can get prepared. Because if we were all talking about this and we were all prepared, we wouldn't have nearly as many problems that I see anticipated, because we're not talking. So imagine if you're saying, hey, there's this event happening over here. This store just got taken out. These trains are getting robbed. This is the highway banditry, this, that, and the other. They're not going to want you to share that. So I think that preemptively, because what I envision with the food shocks coming, first one will be 2021. Next heaviest food shock will be 2023, 4, where it'll get really expensive and not very much around. 2028, we're in a whole different world than we understand, where food just won't be available in some places. But they're not going to want these discussions coming forward. There's too much invested in the global warming initiatives for the last 40 years. I mean, how many billions, trillions of dollars are in that whole market there, carbon, just the funding for universities, textbooks, careers based around that, more funding based on trying to prove something. If that were to suddenly be turned over and say, oops, we all made a mistake for 40 years, it is starting to cool now, they're not even going to want those discussions. Even if new science is found, they're not going to want those discussions out there and that new information brought forth, because they just lost the whole, they'll be never respected or thought of as experts in those fields again. So as we go through all these massive changes coming up, they've already started. If you haven't noticed the weather around you.
Yeah.
But I think this is part of it, is to preemptively start to say that, oh, their thoughts are bad because they're talking about fill in the blank.
Yeah, of course.
But I think the first is just to put the foot in the door to try to stop the conversation as we move down toward the food riots. And that's my personal opinion. You can agree or disagree with that. But this whole thing is a slippery slope. It's kind of the direction we're going. I don't know what you feel about it, but I personally don't think that's the way we should be going.
No,
Well,
I
I know.
don't. I really don't. So I did see a premise around maybe 5 years ago, probably a little bit older, regarding, I think it was Virgin Media. They put, I found a PDF online, and it was talking about how they were viewing how the internet will change within the next 10 years, and it's going to have a banding system, much like how cable TV works. So you'd have access to kind of basic internet, so like Google, Wikipedia, and so on. And then if you want to access the likes of Disney websites, it'll be a little bit higher. If you want to access, alternative content, shall we say, that's probably going to be the extreme end of what you have to pay for. And you'd have to pay based on the scale. And the bandwidth that you would receive to receive information from the internet will be how much you pay. So the whole internet will be, again, like cable TV. And we've seen that kind of shutting down across, certainly across the Western countries. How is the internet in the other side of the world? I mean, is the speeds okay? Is there kind of censorship that's happening in the same way that's happened over here?
I'm going to say yes in the States, but in Asia, unless you're in Taiwan, or I should say Hong Kong, these other periphery countries outside China, which China tries to control, everything is super fast, like 100 megabytes up and 100 megabytes down. Even just using my phone as a primary source, I'm still getting 72 up and down out of a phone, and it's only on a 4G system. Everything's pretty much open and pretty free to talk about here, as long as you don't criticize government and do anything with drugs or have drug videos. You're pretty good. You can talk about anything,
I mean, it's a crazy time. I think we're going through this whole transition of just languages being forced to be changed by legislation. And it's just like you're legislating language. Where is that going to stop? And that really worries me too.
Yeah, because we see these same things through history, and living out here. And I just want to give a very quick history lesson to anybody who's very aligned with the left over here and think that they're making progress inside their ideology, that they're climbing the ranks, that, oh, I'm going to be somebody in there. But what is happening, and if you haven't, since I lived out in China and worked there, I was very familiar with this whole rise of communism through, the bourgeois area of the 1930s. Now, I want to take you back in history a little bit here. And you have to realize in the 1930s, China was on the same par level with places like Paris and New York on the fashion scene. Motion picture scene was coming up there heavily. Fashion industry. I mean, it was a very, very elegant, high-class city at the time, equivalent with anything. Paris, Hong Kong, London, New York at that time, and it was rising up through the ranks as any of these international destinations. Japanese came in, and after Mao took over, the whole communist revolution took place. And here was the thing, and I can't impart the message enough. And I'm starting to see the same exact things that are happening in the United States of these shock brown troops, the brown shirts, using waving the little red books and coming together, using the students to control the whole political discourse and the language discourse. Because they did the same exact thing. It's like a copy-paste 2.0. First, they destroyed everything in the past, or they tried to. Then they tried to suppress all the language, and if you didn't have the right language. And then they tried to ban anything that wasn't 100% in tow with the ideology. So if you listened to the wrong music, they came and broke your records, they poured ink on your head and took you away to labor camp, etc. But here was the most fascinating thing. Like, all these kids were coming up in the ranks, and they were getting their little cadres together, and they became quite powerful, some of them. But then they were taken out because they became the threat, because they had too many followers. And then within the party, they rose up through the ranks, but then when they thought they were the hot to do, the rest of the Communist Party would look down and go, well, they have 50,000 people following. What if they decide to go off and do their own thing? They're a threat. We should eliminate them right now. So these people who thought they were the safest ended up being thrown into the camps as well because they had too large of a following.
Interesting.
Now, they used all the students in the beginning to bring up the movement and get everybody riled up and get into the movement to get it all through society. But once that happened, the cream that was rising up all just got whacked out at the camps themselves. Very important message for all of you out there who are leaning toward the communist socialist ideologies. It just never worked, and you got to go to China. And obviously, if you're really pushing that direction, you didn't read much about history, or they didn't teach you much about Mao's Cultural Revolution and who ended up in the camps. It was the leaders and the people who were recruiting for that whole communist revolution were the ones who were thrown in the camps about a fourth of the way in through the whole thing.
Wow, that's pretty
interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah, you suddenly hear that the student movement is the catalyst really for all this societal change and the change in the workplaces. There's certainly a push towards that ideology within workplaces now, and then they're changing how people talk to each other in terms of interrelationship stuff. And it's quite disturbing. I think it upsets a lot of people, and I think that's where it's very much there's like a cutting edge between what is traditional, what is old, what is the way that is, and this is our way. This is a very communist, socialist kind of way, and it's disturbing how the changes are so radical. What would have to be expected? Man, I don't even know where it could end. That's what worries me, I guess, because I guess that it's taken till there is nothing, and then you end up with the opposite, which is a dictatorship rather than a community benefit, should we say?
Well, see, now you got to wrap the whole grand solar minimum into this thing as well.
Okay.
When you say take, and there's loss of life, and it doesn't matter if the population declines, because the population is going to decline during the grand solar minimum anyway. So if you were leaders of movements or whatever global initiatives that you want to put in forth that are led by a few families and peoples out there, you would probably try to establish a new system while the old system's crumbling anyway. Like, it's going to crumble anyway. That's the whole thing, and the reason I keep talking about the economics in the grand solar minimum, because every grand solar minimum, go back to the past, just say 2,300 years, 2,400 years, the food always gets too expensive. There's always overthrows of governments because they can't feed their people. and this just general civilization crumbles and then it reemerges on the backside.
Okay, so let's.
But imagine during the crumbling that you could reset society into this socialist, or like this, whatever, let's say communist, because call it what it is. I'm just not even going to put the light version in there of socialism. I'm going to call it communist ideologies coming in. If you could reset the whole world, or as much as you could, to communists, then when you reemerge out of the backside, you could get everybody in the cities equal, one bread for you, one bread for me. We're happy.
Okay, so let's talk.
I see something like this intertwining with the grand solar minimum. Again, I keep saying they're going to try to ride on top of a natural cycle to get a bunch of these initiatives through, and when we come out on the other end, it'll be
Okay,
something quite different.
Let's go back to that what we were talking about there. So I noticed grand solar minimum. So for those people who are uninitiated to know what a grand solar minimum is, do you want to give us a bit of a layman's perspective of what a solar minimum is? I mean, I know, but most people perhaps generally don't. So.
Well, let me throw the question back at you, because you saw me present at AB10 and Alternative View 10. So what did you glean from my presentation? Or now, how would you explain it? So I'm a guy who's in it all the time. And imagine if you're going to explain this to a friend of yours who's never heard of it either. Can you explain it? Well, how would you start to explain it to somebody to even get their interest piqued enough where they wouldn't turn off? Because we've been so set up with so many trigger words now, as soon as you hear it, you turn off and you're like, don't talk. And we've just been pre-programmed not only in the language with the left or these new types of terms we have to use by law, but the trigger word programming is in there too. So I could probably give you a couple trigger words like UFOs, Bigfoot, chemtrails. These are trigger words. As soon as you hear it, your conversation's pretty much over. They've already boxed you into something. The new one for me that I get a lot of time is Ice Age. It's not an ice age. Don't call it the wrong thing. It's a grand solar minimum, mini ice age. But see, they'll drop an ice age right on top of you. So what are you going to think? Oh, there's an ice age coming. You're going to think, those things take thousands of years. Come on, this guy's insane. It's 2 miles over ice of Chicago and New York. That thing takes how many thousands of years to manifest? And this guy's talking ice age. So they try to derail your argument right away.
Okay. So actually, I like what you did there. I actually did, because you flipped on its head quite smartly. Instead of me going, hey, just tell me about all your stuff. You're like, actually, what did you glean from this? What did you learn from this? How I learned that. One thing I did like is that I have an interest in history, mythology, culture, and how things have changed over time. And I said, when you were talking about how societies have rose and fell over those periods of time, I instantly connected to what it is that I know. So when you talked about how when cultures that rose to a high level of degree, so shall we say like the Romans or even before that, when climate, our solar system takes over and affects our climate, shall we say, when that starts affecting agriculture, when that starts affecting people, and the governance that's in control is the one that is expected by the people to help them out, and there's nothing they can actually do because the cycle is already in effect. It's a solar system cycle that's happening, and that is affecting the climate, and that is affecting the agriculture. And when you were talking about those waves of like the different cultures appear to be on a 400-year cycle, and you gave an example via you had a graph up of when the solar cycles were coming through, and that is exactly when societies have rose and fall throughout history. And I took that and I was like, actually, that matches up really effectively. And when you see like when those those solar minimums have come up, so there's like the one from the 1600s, 1610, isn't it? Is that what the last sun's cycle major one was?
1640, yeah, that's the famous one, modern minimum. So most people in the UK would be most familiar with that one.
Yeah, so do you want to go from there then?
I don't know. We can just step back in history and then, okay, so we'll do it like this. I'll give you a time period and then you tell me about the history that you understand during that time, or what would be a common knowledge fact, I guess, of that time. So if I say 1600s, just the average person would say kings and queens, England, a lot of ships moving to other places, to the New World, and that kind of thing. That's kind of generally what people would think, right?
That's right, yeah.
Of that time period.
Yeah, because I guess that's a time where there's an exploration element going on. They want to find new trade routes to the Americas, and obviously it's the Far East. They want to bring new foods in. They want to move people as well. And I guess from there you have a lot of people trying new things for the first time. So sugar, potatoes have been brought into the Western countries. So food is changing. So I guess at that time, when there's that modern minimum happening, we're kind of perhaps compensating by bringing in food for other areas. Is that how would you see that as well?
Yeah, because especially the Roman Empire, if I say 535 AD, late antique, little ice age, how many people really have a recollection and can actually tell me something or know something about that little era of time when it was the actual end of the decimation and Roman Empire finished? Actually, right around 400 AD was that end of that grand solar minimum. They don't even have a name for it, it's so far back. But then they started to come out, the warming started again, and wham, they had 3 massive, like VEI 7 eruptions during the same couple of years. And there was so much ash on the planet, whoosh, temperatures plunged back down again. Romans couldn't feed their people. And if you look around like 380 or say 350 AD, why did the Romans just try to expand so much at that time? You think they were doing it really for economic purposes? No way. They were going to look for more food grow zones, hoping they could find another place that could bring more grains in to keep the people satiated. So you see these land expansions and these kind of power plays across the planet looking for resources. Follow the timelines of those two, because they didn't. Do you think that Genghis Khan just one day woke up and said, let's go invade the entire planet today? You think Zheng He, that Zheng He is like the Christopher Columbus of China. See, China thought another grand solar minimum was starting, so they sent him over to Africa to look for new trade routes. And guess what? They're back in Africa today. They must have known something about a cycle and returning rainfall, because Chinese are over in Africa with all their investment projects. But what's so interesting, chase back the voyages of Zheng He, that's Zhenghe, Zheng He. And where did they go? He was trying to get off trading with Eastern Africa and get that whole trade route established with East Africa, from India to Peshawar over to Africa, just like we see the string of pearls today. Imagine that.
So these cycles are, so every 400 years, is that their average? I think it comes to peaks and troughs in those points.
Yeah, now the 400 years are the super intense ones, but in the middle there's a little light one. It's like a quick little, they're very short, 10, 15 years, and solar activity declines just enough to affect a little bit of food production. But then on the 400 years, really where you get these massive declines in population, governments, food production, climate shifting tremendously. Like we're in the beginning of this new shift right now. So this is why the weather's so tumultuous around the planet. And it's always in the beginning of the shift, because everything's been stable for 400 years. And now it's getting bashed out of place. So everything's trying to collide in the atmosphere. Got new jet streams moving to new places. Oh, wait, there's already a jet stream there. Get out of the way. Well, now we got a doubling or tripling of jet streams over those areas, and we're getting these massive rainouts. Cloud bands are shifting. This beginning part of it's the most ferocious in the weather changes. So after about 10 years, it should stabilize more. But then it's just going to get cooler for a while, and then we'll come out of it. And apparently coming out of it, the weather's not as mixed up as it is going into it, because everything is kind of morphed and shifted around, and nothing's really stuck stably for centuries and centuries to move to a new pattern. It's only been there for a decade or decade and a half or two, max 20 years, and then it starts to shift out again. So that's not really locked in stone as it would be on a multi-century pattern.
Yeah, so I'm looking at your data here in your article. So this is the if you were to sign up to your website, that is oilseedcrops.org. What happens when you hit your subscribe is that you send us a PDF, and that's what I was just browsing through as we started this conversation. And I'm looking at this data for this about the variety of solar activity features that are happening, and the 11-year solar cycle as well, because I think that's what confuses some people with this as well. Is that would you agree with that?
Yeah, because how much are you hearing about the 11-year solar cycle, solar minimum right now in your news over there? Are you hearing about it a lot? Because it's in the papers quite a bit in the States about the 11-year solar minimum.
Yeah, I think over here it's generally, there's a lot of the science-based TV shows do talk about it quite a lot. There's a particular scientist who works for the BBC called Brian Cox, a very famous guy. On a lot of his astronomy shows, he's talking about the 11-year solar cycle. So in the last one, what is the solar system? He was talking about that quite a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, is that like a topic that comes up quite frequently in the eastern countries, just due to the agriculture base there?
It is, but they are so deep into moon cycles anyway. So if you live over here, every single holiday that comes up is based on a lunar calendar. There's people out burning money, people going to the temples. It's very much still ingrained to follow the cycles of the moon. to follow the longer cycles within cycles, and it's still just so much part of the culture. You know, the birth sign, we have Virgo and whatever, Sagittarius and whatnot. Well, they have the same, animal signs, if you will, snake, rabbit, cow, pig, whatever. But they're so following, still so ingrained, and it is such a integral center part of the society and age is still understanding the planetary movements, the heavens, the cycles of the moon, and how all this is integrated. So they're very aware of the 11-year solar cycle, but they're very aware also of this larger, heavier cycle, this grand solar minimum, very aware of it now. You can see China posturing everywhere. You can see Japan up there posturing. You see what's happening in Korea, because they all have their own belief systems of the seed point of human consciousness is at the Big Dipper.
Yep.
According to the Beidou Qixing cult, or the cult of the Big Dipper. And it's not like a cult, like a Jonestown cult or anything. It's what they use for like a belief system, like the Taoists or something like this. But they follow a couple of different traditions out here, one being the fox. And it's you got to go really far back in history to find much about the fox, 3,000 years prior, and you start to get a lot of iterations about the fox. But they're still following that same trajectory of following the stars around the heavens to see what's going to happen, because the emperor was always removed when the mandate from heaven was removed. And they even use it today, like Xi Jinping, he still talks about he has the mandate of heaven to be the ruler of China, to put himself as the new emperor in there. Yeah, they're still so focused on it. It's a center point. But, we don't even know basic astronomy back in those classes. You go to even a high schooler and ask them about the planets, they won't know what you're talking about. At least in an American school, they're so taken away from anything science-based and astronomy-based. It's just really, they have the most basic rudimentary levels. They won't even know how big the sun is comparatively to the Earth. It's like the simplest facts we all knew by 3rd, 4th, 5th grade back when I was growing up.
Yeah, same here. Astronomy and science actually was it's what inspired me. I was inspired to look at the heavens because I was at school and my teacher would be talking to me about it and the fantastical things that are happening in space. And most of the books that I had by the time I was 8 were all astronomy based. So I had that particular, inquisitiveness about the heavens because my mother was interested in school taught me. But it's true. My son does, but I guess he probably gets that more from myself. But I'm not sure anyone else does. People don't even know what the names of the planets are. That really disturbs me. And then we share our celestial neighborhood with them.
I've been told directly, governments are in this process right now of continuity of government maintenance, if you will. That's about the best way I can describe it to you. Governments are buying all the same stuff we would want to buy so they can maintain the government or the continuity of it as everything else around it collapses. They need the same supplies. They need the food, the medicine, the repair parts, the motors, the machinery, the vehicles, the fuel. They need all that same stuff that we need. But if they came clean and told the world what was happening, now you'd have 7 billion people out there trying to buy the same stuff that all 200 plus governments on the world are trying to buy at the same time. There's going to be a lockup somewhere along there. Yeah. And people are going to panic, and they're going to stop, and they're going to pull their money out of the banks, and the fractional reserve system is not going to work because there's just going to be too many withdrawals, and people won't invest in the stock market. And why would you go put into your 401k? I need the money to buy more seeds. Give me all of it today. So there'd be a lot of just institutional changes if they really came clean on the financial side of it. Forget everything else. And again, it shows you in the schooling system where the priorities lie. It seems that there's a concerted effort, at least in my own opinion, to steer everybody away from the basic knowledge of how these cycles are repeating, because it is such an integral part to keep our society functioning until the very last minute before the wheels fall off. Full thing about everything's stable, it's going to remain stable. We're at the 11-year solar cycle, not the grand solar minimum. Don't listen to those crackpot guys. Although the astrophysicists are talking about it, it's in all the peer-reviewed research. You got the top NASA people, European Space Agency people, Russian Space Agency, and everybody in between, even Piers Corbyn over there in the UK, talking about Our sun's going into a very prolonged solar activity decline called a grand solar minimum. It's just established science. But they don't want people to look at it, understand it, because your spending habits are going to shift. You're going to move your spending habits greatly. They're going to shift gargantuan steps to whatever direction they're going to move. Once you understand what this is, your lifestyle is going to change too. You're going to start to take preventive measures. You got kids, you got family. You want to keep them safe. You're going to start buying a lot of different stuff. A lot of that money is not going to go into these traditional industries, and some are just going to dry up and die on the vine. Now, they're trying to prevent hoarding, first of all. They're trying to prevent artificial runs on the just-in-time delivery system and the manufacturing base itself. I've been told directly, governments are in this process right now of continuity of government maintenance, if you will. That's about the best way I can describe it to you. Governments are buying all the same stuff we would want to buy so they can maintain the government or the continuity of it as everything else around it collapses. They need the same supplies. They need the food, the medicine, the repair parts, the motors, the machinery, the vehicles, the fuel. They need all that same stuff that we need. But if they came clean and told the world what was happening, now you'd have 7 billion people out there trying to buy the same stuff that all 200 plus governments on the world are trying to buy at the same time. There's going to be a lockup somewhere along there.
Yeah.
And people are going to panic, and they're going to stop. They're going to pull their money out of the banks, and the fractional reserve system is not going to work because there's just going to be too many withdrawals, and people won't invest in the stock market. And why would you go put into your 401k? I need the money to buy more seeds. Give me all of it today. So there'd be a lot of just institutional changes if they really came clean on the financial side of it. Forget everything else. Just the way the financial system works globally would collapse if they came clean and people started to adjust their spending or not putting it into the traditional investment mediums because, hey, you can retire in 50 years, 30 years. Don't worry about that. It's coming now. So this is what I believe, that there's a lot of reassurances in the media that it's only 11 years and everything's stable. And I don't know if you see those same articles, but there's a full-on, full-court press here about everything's stable. Everything is totally stable. Back to work here in the U.S. media.
No, I haven't seen that actually. I haven't seen the. I've seen the mentions of it, but that's about it. That's just that's what I will search on the old with Hathaway. Remember the Solar Science Physics group talking about the solar minimum.
Yeah, they were more than 100% wrong on their predictions. Pretty much when you look at the predictions from the last solar cycle, John Casey's the person you want to follow. He's a former NASA space advisor as well. He was the only one who pretty much got it right in that 78 to 79 range. Everybody was up in the 120s. And again, when we come for solar cycle 24 predictions here, 25 predictions rolling out, they're completely, I personally feel that they're calling too high again. But again, it goes right back into that keeping society stable. If the solar researchers were to come out from NASA and European Space Agency and everybody in between and independents and come out and said, yeah, we are only going to 50 sunspots or a little less for the average,
So
that would verify we're going to do a grand solar minimum. So then people would really start to look into it and research just like you're doing. What is this grand solar minimum thing here?
So I'm just looking at this article here from astronomynow.com, published in 2015, and it talks about the diminishing solar activity will bring around a new ice age in 2030, published by the Moscow State University press release. And I mean, again, I'm only skimming the article, but yeah, it appears to be pretty much what you're saying there. There's an article here actually referencing a 1677 painting from Abraham Hardonis of the Frozen Thames, when obviously like London froze over during the 1600s.
That's what they're expecting again. Now, see, but the problem is they use that word ice age in that title. No, it's a mini ice age. It is not an ice age. So media watchdogs that you can only listen to them, and they're the ones who can tell you if news is fake news or not fake news. But again, there's a whole bunch of these in the scientific arena too. But they keep coming back and they keep using this word ice age. Stop doing that. I'm not talking to you personally about it. I'm talking about the writers of these supposed watchdog scientific sites. They keep again, it's this whole trigger word thing. They keep putting ice age. So as soon as you see it, what is the first thing that you think? If I say, hey, there's an ice age coming, what's your first thought?
The first thought is something like where the ice is like a mile thick and it's covering like a large portion of the Earth's crust.
Yeah, that's exactly what you think. And then what's your second thought after I say, hey, there's an ice age coming by 2030?
What do you think? That's going to take a long time to build up. That's probably not going to happen in that way. But I guess.
Yeah, and that guy must be a lunatic for even talking as such.
Okay.
Or girl. or
Yeah.
they or them or whatever you want to call the
Yeah,
people talking.
that particular article was by a lady, but yeah, yeah, it's a powerful subject. Like I say, it touches everything that of the human existence. There's everything from the financial side of things, the economic side of things, but more importantly, the human side of things, isn't it? It's about how we function food, because we don't function in cold very well. We need food to survive. We need our energy, so it is going to affect the entire human existence, and it will change the world considerably. So, in terms of this has been a pattern that is reoccurring, as you're saying, and we're talking about all the different effects that could have. I mean, so do you think the governments must know about this and are preparing accordingly, and that's why they're buying all this gear up?
Yes, and beyond that, the distraction, they're going to keep going so you don't look in the right direction. The distraction factor, as I call it, is going to keep ramping up until one day you wake up literally and you realize what has happened, and at that point it's too late. I believe that time is around 2021 of harvest season. So look for the bigger, more Hollywood-esque distractions. So far, how many distractions can you think of right now that people are actively talking about? I mean, the division in the Trump camp versus the rest of the United States, and the trade deal with China, and the possible tariffs with Mexico. That's the distraction factor in America for like just the general population. They need to keep everybody fighting amongst themselves, and
in the UK.
and that's like my simplest example. But what do you have on your end over there?
So in the UK, of course, the biggest topic on most people's agenda is Brexit. How we've essentially split from the EU, but we haven't really, because there's lots of trade deals that have already been signed into agreement behind that, like the EU Defence Union. The links between our military services have already happened. Our infrastructure is owned majority by European nations and countries, and by corporations that are obviously on the continent. So that I don't think that's factored into many people's consciousness, but they're not aware of that. They seem to think British Gas is still British Gas when it's actually owned by Centrica. They think British Telecom is BT when it's actually owned by Telefonica, which is based in Spain. So there's this whole idea where you can literally have an instant split, I think, is a sticking point. We now have Prime Minister has now resigned from role, so we have political divisions within each political party that are for and against, because they don't. I just don't think they know how to do it. And every political party wants to take over so they can make their grand vision come to fruition. But within each of those camps, there's lots of different divisions themselves. So Brexit is quite the mess. Then you have the situation with Ireland, which is Ireland is part of the EU. Northern Ireland isn't. So there's effectively what they call a hard barrier there, or a soft barrier, literally. People can come in that way and then just come to England, or do they reinforce it? That doesn't happen. And they've obviously been considerable time in the last 20 years between Northern Ireland and Ireland to have a much more settled agreement. They appear to be much more coherent in terms of conversation and dialogue these days. But Brexit is pushing that back the other way. The situation crisis happening, which again is driven by need for food or need for a better life, because where they've come from is very difficult.
Finger pointing everywhere, wherever you look. They're getting everybody to point fingers and just be so distracted by the smaller things in life that this is the point I'm getting at. It goes on in every single country. They're keeping the finger pointing going on, so you're not really looking at the greater picture of why your food price just went up 20%.
Yeah.
Thought the inflation rate was 2%. And even that's just straight up theft from the central bank. So when they say inflation rate's 2%, I interpret that in English as 2% theft every year of my wages. But regardless of that 2% theft or 2% inflation, whichever way you want to term, it's the same exact thing happening. 2%, but then suddenly food rises 20, 23%. How did that happen? How did that sneak right in there? Yeah. Why is nobody talking about that?
I work as a department leader within a retail chain, so yeah, I see those effects at the shelf edge. I see those prices going up. I see corporations effectively trying to merge and buy each other out because they're trying to bring down the price of food so it's kept at a manageable level. Again, what you're saying there is that it perhaps is to hide that effect of what's going to go on.
Could be. And if I could string 3 points together that you were just talking about in one lump sum.
Go for it.
Alternative U10 opened my eyes to a lot of different things, especially the dates where many of these programs need to be implemented by. The United Defense Force and the EU there, that's going to be taking a deeper shape and a more cohesive unit by 2023. The Rapid Response Force highway system, expressway system for the Rapid Response Force needs to be completed by 2023. The rollout of 5G needs to be completed by 2023. And, after listening to David Ellis explain what this whole integrated EU Defense Force was, and then I took it to study this a little further, and what I found, there's a branch off of this called the European Friendly Neighborhood Policy. Well, this gets the EU straight down into North Africa in the exact same areas where the Romans were growing grains to send back to Rome during the height of the Roman Empire. It was much rainier and much wetter back then. In the presentation, I talked about the rain cycles returning to North Africa. So how is this United Defense Force going to occupy North Africa, right in the same grain growing belts that the Romans had? More rain now, grain's coming back. Libya got incredible production. Tunisia this year, all-time record production. And then somehow, northern 55 north and above in the Ural Mountains, terrible planting this year. Bulgaria just got flooded out, half the corn. France just got ripped across with that that cyclonic bombogenesis that took out whatever crops were in the field that had emerged. America's down 58%. It's the lowest crop planting. Even back, you have to go back prior to 1938 in America to find the least amount of crops. And China just lost 30% because of this ravaging, armyworm invasion there. They're eating everything alive. Literally, this old armyworm is going off the hook. So we have major crop loss on the corn side of things. The wheat's not doing much better, but then we got all these united fronts coming through to occupy grow zones in North Africa. And here's the kicker. That date, 2023, let that stick in your mind. Because this is the first years that myself and everybody I talk with talk about the first global food shortages happening to the point where, and it's going to be so far in the face that it's going to cause panic, and this is when we're going to see some real shifts in our society. Are these exact same dates, 2023 and 24? That would explain the Rapid Response Force and the completion of the highway system in the EU, because there's going to be breakaway countries and people protesting all over the place, and they're going to have quickly to get into the EU to control the EU citizens. It's not about an invasion. Come on, that's going to be suppress the citizens inside the EU. And I'll leave it there.
No, there's a really interesting point here. So, I guess, I'm not sure if I have the slides available. Perhaps you could send me them. I'm talking about the one that Dave Ellis sent.
And here's my research that I did on that. This is crazy here. If they were to get the grain growing zones, what the Romans used, the primary water source from Libya set out a massive irrigation project across North Africa. They could grow more grains than all of North America combined if they had the right water source, because the rain's above ground with the rainfalls increasing. Yeah. So think about that. It won't matter if the rest of the planet goes offline or huge amounts of Northern Europe go offline and Canada goes offline and parts of China. Who cares? They're going to have a whole new something bigger than all of North America combined in Northern Africa.
So this is when you say offline, you're talking about the food production, aren't you? The agriculture production.
Yeah, agriculture production going offline. There's very many forecasts out there. You can just find this anywhere on the net about what's anticipated in the grand solar minimum circa 2023, 24. There'll be very little production coming out of Canada or the northern states of the United States. There'll be very little production coming out of China. They're already starting to see losses. North Korea as well. And 55 north in Europe, anywhere above there, Ural Mountains, that whole area, going to be taken pretty much offline. Parts of Australia, parts of South America, they don't grow so much down that further Tierra del Fuego tip, but Brazilian agriculture will be affected along with Argentinian. So one place goes offline, you need a replacement. This is the most brilliant chessboard move I've ever heard of. How many years whoever would have thought of it? All these plays that they need to get all these people out of there depopulated so they can go in and get a whole new grow zone.
Yeah, you look at the biggest scheme of things, that appears to be, that's a big game of chess.
That is a game of chess, but here's the game. They knew the grand solar minimum was coming, so you just leave it down to that. They knew these changes were coming, and they've already been preparing for them. Yeah, that's the whole kicker right there. They knew it was coming. Why aren't they warning anybody? Why aren't they telling us this is coming?
Yeah, so where I was going to go with which presentation came first is that, of course, there was you used both a very similar map of Europe, and which contained Africa, in regards to what the EU Defence Union has said that it wants to do in regards to Africa. and it particularly highlighted areas where they want to go and they want to. What's the word for it they used? Expand into the Africas. And David Ellis obviously presented that chart that was which was an EU document that presented that, and then when we laid it over with what the presentation that you did, and that it's interesting that it really was the same areas of regards to where food growth is going, particularly where China is investing, in regards to what is now the growing green areas. They appear to be the same belts that they're after. So, yes, it does appear to be, on the whole, that's the areas the EU wants to get into. That's the areas where China wants to get into, because that's where future agriculture is going to be, because it has to be in order to continue their culture. So that there's almost like a hidden fight for survival that's happening between where do we need to invest, where do we need to buy up, because, heck, we've got to survive.
You think the Ukraine was just about politics? It's the biggest grain growing belt in Central Europe there, period. Nothing bigger. It's the largest grain producer right in that area of Europe.
I did see, obviously, I follow IT a fair bit, and they were talking about the arrangements with China and Russia in particular. So Russia, despite this fact it's under all these economic sanctions, has flipped its economy into it, and it's the largest agriculture grower in the world, and it's growing an absolute surplus of stock and obviously selling it to China, and that's now one of the biggest trade deals that's happened in the last 5 years. That's huge, and it ties in very well into what you're saying, is that whole area of like a lower end of Russia, it's this huge grain belt of crops that they can grow and export. And I think that's why essentially like countries like the US, like Europe, because I guess they want those same areas as well.
Take a look at Kazakhstan, clear out. It's on the western border of China or the far east of Russia. Another huge grain grower, and guess who's in there helping them revamp their agriculture so they can almost double their output? China and Russia. So what's going to be more valuable for you, a cubic meter of natural gas, a barrel of oil, or a ton of food?
Well, the ton of food is very short-term prospect as to how long it will last. But I guess you've got to flip your agriculture growth. You have to turn it to be vertical. You've got to grow in the smallest amount of space. I'll be honest with you. So when I came across vertical farming and the likes of growing indoors, probably about 2008, 2009, I became aware of an independent documentary that was aired called The Zeitgeist Addendum and Zeitgeist Moving Forward.
Saw that too.
In regards to vertical farming, rather that's where they were looking to go. It was like one of the solutions for the world being the way that it is, and I was very much aware of that, and I kind of got involved with that on a ground level here in Nottingham. And I was like, okay, so what? I don't really know anything to how to implement it. It appears rather simple. It almost appears that we could, transform places like car parks or abandoned buildings into like indoor farms, effectively, with the right lighting conditions and growing. And I've kind of wondered, in 10 years, how come we haven't done that if this is coming? Taking abandoned spaces and turning them into, corporations or companies of, why haven't we gone into full-born, new agriculture technologies?
I asked myself the same question, and the only thing I can think of that these facilities are being built in secret, that if they did start massive infrastructure projects to build out such, and there were billions of dollars in companies jumping in, that would also send up a big red flag, like, why would they do that? It's so easy to grow these vegetables outdoors. Why would you set up and spend millions of dollars to put an indoor facility inside there? So I'm saying if it is being done, it's being done with private companies that don't have any eyes on them, that don't have any stockholders or shareholders meetings to be beholden to where they have to present what they're doing. I bet it's a lot of private money doing this, because I know some guys in Tennessee, and they also operate in Kentucky. What they do is they take disused mine shafts, the horizontal ones, not the vertical ones, but the horizontal mine shafts. Could be anything, because there's been a lot of mining in the last couple hundred years in the United States. We'll take an old disused mine shaft or a cave or parts of something into the ground, and then they'll set that up for you in there. And that's kind of their business, what they do. Get the humidity control right, try to figure out what plants are going to grow well inside there, get up the all-in-one LED spectrum grow lights put in, and then get the right electrical supply to you out there. So you can have, they're trying to couple it with fish farming, because a lot of time in these mines, they got water seeps and stuff coming in there. So they try to develop it where they'll actually dig some area out, concrete it in, put the fish in there, and then have this whole system recirculating where the fertilizer from the fish is coming down and dripping
hydroponics,
through
yeah.
the tubes, and they're getting that all indoor, completely protectable, and in no way, shape, or form will be damaged by hail or high winds. But it's a very specialty niche type of thing. But you know what? Their business is really expanding as of late.
Yeah, aquaponics, I think it's called, isn't it? The way you...
Yeah, with the fish when you add it in. But what I do out on my back patio out here is I just have the vertical grow tubes. Now, you ask to set one of these things up. It's an octagon-shaped tube made out of stainless steel, and then inside there's two flat braces, and then you pull the coconut coir between them, and actually it sandwiches in there. On the outside, there's 13 different holes down the front of the tube, and you just split open there's a special tool. It's made out of I wouldn't say stainless, but a little bit harder steel. Where you poke it in, you twist it, and it opens a hole, and you just put your seeds in there or plant roots in there. Turn it back up, and then everything's on a timer, and we water for 15 minutes for every 2 hours. Okay. That thing turns on. It's a DC motor. That's very important to draw water up. DC is far better. So it's a DC motor, and it's gravity fed, so the DC motor just pulls the water up, and it's a hose that's sort of slight angle, and it goes down all the 8 tubes, and then after the 15 minutes, whatever water's in there just starts to drip down, and it's all gravity fed, and when it comes out of the bottom, it just goes back to the recirculating tank. So right now we're about using, say, 20 liters per month to be able to grow.
So what kind of
water issues are another big thing. Water issues are huge. So if you can grow an enormous amount of plants for circulating water like that, why not?
So you talk about there appears to be a concerted effort also to buy up water supplies, or even to dam them off from country to country, particularly where there's a river flows from one country into another. There's particular efforts, certainly some African countries, to literally dam them up so they don't flow into the next area. And there's a powerful documentary came out about 2010, and it was called The Fight for Water, or Blue Water. That was really interesting how that's happening, particularly across the developing worlds, how nations and states, even counties, I think it was a county in India, is stopping water from going from one area into the next just because it wants to become its own state eventually at one time. And I can see that happening. So I think it was areas of Ukraine do that as well. I think there's a major river that comes through. I could be wrong. How they're damming it up so it doesn't flow downstream to their neighbour. Worrying stuff is that keeping fresh water fresh, because obviously a lot of water is just being fed into the ocean. So did you see that as well? Do you see keeping fresh water fresh? Is that a powerful issue that you're seeing in the Eastern world?
The pollution is off the hook out in places like China and other places that don't have so much environmental regulation, like Cambodia, Vietnam. It's just by the wayside as the water is a secondary concern. We have much more understanding of the pollution water, but in China they understand it now too, because it's starting to affect the health of just so far off the hook cancer rates out there that you're just born and you get cancer and you die pretty much now in China. It's so polluted everywhere from the air to the water, but they've understood it, that the roots uptake that too. So they're really trying their best to keep the water cleaner. There's been a lot of new regulations. I'll give China credit. There's a lot of new regulation. They just can't pour straight up whatever into the river anymore. If they get caught, they get arrested, and some of them get executed. But by and large, it's still guanxi, and whoever pays the most amount of money in bribes doesn't get seen. Oh, sorry, gifts. You got to call it a gift. So whoever gives a gift to the inspectors, even if they're blowing like blue dye into the river, is something that they did from some cadmium process, run over the treatment of leather into whatever, and it comes out the backside all contaminated and polluted, and it's blue. If it goes in the river, if I give you a bag of money, you won't see the blue color, and if anything happens, you'll go ahead and stick the police and the dogs on the and it's still like that.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Wow. So yeah, I think I saw a video that was very similar to that, how it was a leather factory, and all the was on the floor. Literally was running down the drain into the river out the back, and it was like, damn. And like you're right, that's what they just said. They just pay them off, so it doesn't matter. They just carry on. Crazy.
Yeah, the thing about the citizens organizing over there too, so they don't want it to appear that there's any fracturing in society. So you got some of these dishonest countryside officials. They're doing what you're saying. They're letting everything run in the river. They get caught. The people are caught because they were taking. So then the citizens, people like you and me. We come out on the street and start saying, hey, you got all the stuff running in the river. I can't get my farm. All the dog, whatever's all sick. Everybody. So instead of actually going up to the next level to take it to, all right, let's talk about this, they bring their private security police thugs in there to beat up all the. And if they try to leave and go to a city capital to lodge a complaint, which they can do legally, or if they try to go to Beijing and lodge a complaint legally, they have their private security actually abduct them off trains and stop them from traveling to be able to lodge a complaint in a larger district, because then real people will start to come back and look. So they have their own little kingdoms and fiefdoms going on there, which is still kind of strange. Well, how they can prevent people from actually going out to and lodge complaints by literally keeping them home where they can't actually go do it. It still goes on to this day. Really, it's a really strange way it works over there, but water's a main contentious issue, and they've been exploring for a lot of something called primary water, which Deborah Tavares talked about at the AB10 conference.
Yeah.
So think about a tree, and the tree comes up from all the roots from underground, and it comes up to the trunk. Well, if you rip that tree out of the ground, you got all those roots that are all over the place. And plunk it back in. All those roots are being fed, and let's say at the end of one of those roots is an aquifer. Could be something coming out of the side of a mountain. Could be actual pools of water under the earth or whatever it is. But that all is leading back to a primary source that's recharging, because they find that some of these aquifers, they're recharging, but they're recharging faster than what could be from the rainfall from above.
Yeah, that's right. They're not refilling fast enough, are they? That's
yeah. Some are refilling way faster than anticipated too. Like there's some oil wells that refill really fast as well. That's from pressure from some other source pushing it in there.
Yeah.
So they call this primary water because that's coming from like a main trunk vein, and what you see way out there at the end of an aquifer is just like the tip of an end of a root off the bottom of the root ball on a tree. So what they're trying to do is trace these back to where the original like trunk water source is. And there's a couple around the world. It's called primary water, and I encourage you to look into this.
I will do, yeah.
Primary water sources. And there's one in Libya.
Ah.
There's one in China as well. And there's two in the United States. And you start to take a look at these areas around the world where there's Argentina has one. And it's kind of there's only been 4 or 5 of these identified across the planet. They call them primary water sources. Deborah Tavares has done a real amazing amount of study on where these are located, how governments are, drawing from these sources, but it's still all about control, because we're told it's a finite resource. It only comes from above. It can get polluted, but there's 3 times more water in the crust of our Earth than there are on all the oceans and lakes and rivers combined on the surface that we're seeing. As you go swimming in the lake or whatever you do, canoeing on a river.
I didn't know that. Actually.
There's 3 times more water under the crust of the earth than there is in all the oceans combined. So that seeps out in some places, this other water. So Noah's Flood's a good one too, because Noah's Flood, these accounts talking about water just spurting out of the earth, and obviously there was something going on with the earth's crust having some ripping or tearing, and this water just starts flowing out. Plus they had the huge amount of rain from above. So I'm saying this had something to do with something in the solar cycle was going on that was much heavier and more powerful. Maybe it was like a once in a 6,000 year event or 12,000 year event, something like this. But it was recorded as water coming from the earth itself coming out, flooding, and also from above.